Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Mark, how are you this afternoon?
Ted, never better. Really humbled and honored that you'd have me on your podcast. Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely, man. I'm honored to have you. I first ran into you a couple years ago at the KM&I conference, and you had a very no BS style to your presentation, and I thought that was really good. I like that no BS approach to tackling some of these issues. So I'm happy to have you here.
Well, I appreciate that. And I do remember meeting you. Thank you.
Yeah.
For one, the distinction of that baritone voice that you have that kind of carries through the room. But again, thanks very much.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't we get you introduced for the folks that don't know you? Our target audience is primarily knowledge management and innovation professionals at law firms, and you kind of sit on the other side of the buying table today. So you're the chief legal officer at DHL, but you've had stints at Safelight and Sherwin-Williams, and then you have you're active with ACC. Is that correct?
I've been a member of ACC since I got out of law school quite some time ago. But yes, and just for visibility, at DHL, I do serve as the chief legal officer for our supply chain operations in the Americas.
Okay, good stuff. And then, so are you the primary interface between the company and outside counsel?
Yeah, when it comes to the DHL organizations, the businesses, the operations, I am, but as you would anticipate, especially in an organization our size and a department our size, there's a number of folks that work in what we call legal innovation. LEDA is the acronym. Many people would know that as legal ops, but they're the ones day-to-day interfacing with the law firm, particularly with regard to billing, administrative issues, et cetera. But there are a number of senior people on the team that also report to me, whether it's litigation, commercial. They and members of their team are interacting with law firms regularly, as do I.
Okay. Well, good stuff. Yeah. So this is a real treat because normally we have law firm folks from the law firm side on. This is the first time we've had somebody from the buy side on, which I'm really excited about because we got some interesting topics to tackle. And it's an interesting time in the industry. There's so much change going on with Gen AI and how law firms are going about the process of thinking through pricing strategies and, what's the future of the billable hour. But before we jump into that, you and I discussed, the last time we spoke, we discussed a very interesting statistic that I think didn't align well with your perspective. And it was a statistic from the Legal Value Network and the Blickstein Group do an annual, they call it LPPM. It's Legal Pricing and Project Management.
Right.
And they survey, I forget the number of GCs, or I'm sorry, this is law firm GCs. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions they asked that I thought was super interesting. So this is from December. I got this report in December. Right. It says, our clients blank us to use generative AI, and 11% said forbid, 30% said discourage. So 41% of these law firm GCs are under the impression that their clients either forbid or discourage them from using generative AI on their matters. And I think you had a different perspective from the buy side in your work with ACC. Can you share some of that?
Sure. Well, my reaction initially was a bit of incredulousness of, really? There's even that many that either forbid or discourage the use. Now, the Blickstein Group has got a phenomenal reputation. I know Brad quite well. And the integrity of the data that he reports on is nothing less than purely factual and, of course, accurate. And he goes about doing what he's doing in a very, very objective way. But I have a very different perspective when it comes to embracing AI. The journey that we are on, Ted, as the buyers of legal services, we've been on for the better part of a decade. but we really had no way of tying a lot of ideas together that ultimately are focused on how do legal services get delivered by the sellers of legal services, the law firms, the ALSPs, et cetera, but also by the buyers, their in-house teams, better, faster, and cheaper. And one of the ways that you can do that, not only now, but on a sustainable basis in the future, is by leveraging information that you have in your files, whether it doesn't matter if you're a law firm or in-house, but information that historically is just called data. It could be in your document management system, it could be on hard drives throughout your department. But that information, that data tells stories. And those stories allow you to leverage past to help make decisions going forward so that you don't repeat the missteps that you made in the past. But in many regards, you find ways of doing much more efficiently. And the data has always been there, whether in the traditional metal file cabinets or today's what you might refer to as an electronic filing cabinet. But the technology has not been there to help us sew all of this together. So when I look at the opportunity to leverage technology, whether you want to call it AI, which here we refer to as augmented intelligence as opposed to artificial intelligence, as a way of helping me as the buyer of legal services, not only acquire those services less expensively, but more efficiently, it really does cause me to scratch my head as to why you would not embrace an alternative way of thinking, leveraging that data to help you do things better, faster, cheaper.
Yeah. I'm wondering too if there's not, other factors in play with some of these numbers, like, confirmation bias, where, there's maybe a perception from folks on the sell side of the table that there's resistance or discouragement of using these technologies versus really what the sentiment is on the buy side. But I mean, you have a really good view of this through your work with ACC and as a buyer. And from your perspective, you absolutely want, it sounds like, if I'm understanding correctly, you absolutely want firms leveraging this tech in being more efficient and cost effective in their service delivery. Is that accurate?
Well, it is accurate. And my engagement with the ACC, particularly when I was chair of the Law Department Management Network, gave me visibility and insight into what other law departments are doing, how they're thinking, how they're embracing technology. And albeit that was 5 years ago, which in many regards in technology, that was a lifetime ago. So change is continuous, but I think a great deal of the concern is a concern for the unknown. What can AI do? Unbridled. It's literally a racehorse that just continues around the track without a jockey. You've got to have some controls over it. We all have read about the attorney in New York, all that about a couple of years ago, who submitted a brief in a litigation matter, and everything was driven by AI and conclusions were reached, and everything was wrong with regard to citations, and nobody wants to be in that situation. But I think those that take the time to really understand what is the opportunity ahead of them with regard to how to effectively use technology, whether it is AI or whether it is a new platform, are those that are going to put themselves, especially in this hyper competitive market in which we all operate, Ted, in a very competitive position to really not only advance the interests of their clients, but to do so in a way where the service delivery is much more affordable.
And there are some numbers that kind of support this. So I just opened up the 2024 Law Department Operations Survey that is also a Blickstein Group survey, and it shows quite a bit of uptick in sentiment around this. So it looks like in 2023, and that may be the source of the disconnect here. In 2023, only 63% of law firms encouraged the use of Gen AI. In 2024, that number rose to 78%. So things are clearly trending in that direction. One interesting stat here as part of this LDO survey that I is a real head scratcher for me is I went back, and listeners have heard me talk about this multiple times. They may be sick of hearing it at this point, but I went back and did a survey or a quick analysis of the ILTA roster from 2014, and I looked at all the job titles for law firms that had the word innovation in the title, and there were 16 in 2014, 11 years ago. In 2020, late 2024, 10 years later, there were about a little over 300. Today, there's close to 400. So there's been about a 2,000% increase in innovation roles within law firms. So basically a 20x increase in investment in innovation work, because that's how law firms invest, is primarily through people. They do very little R&D. So it's primarily through people. So 2,000% increase in investment by law firms in innovation. And then the LDO survey, almost 2/3 of law firm clients either disagree or strongly disagree that their law firms are innovative. And that is a massive disconnect in my mind. And I have some theories on why that disconnect exists, but I'm curious about your take on if law firms are investing in innovation, why are clients not feeling it?
Because I think, and these are part of my theories as well, but they're also based on discussions that I've had with multiple law firm partners from many law firms, from the AmLaw 50 on down, where when I talk to the partners, especially those that are in the corporate setting, which of course involves providing services to DHL, what I am learning is they are investing significantly in technology. And although I don't go through a multiple 20 questions or 30 questions, Ted, with them, the theme that I get back is that investment is internal. It is driving internal efficiencies to allow them among their team to do things better, faster, and cheaper from the perspective of the law firm. And I've got some of the best law firms, I think, in the world, and some very, very progressive law firms that are using technology. But when I look at my legal bills today versus 5 years ago versus 10 years ago, and I look, for example, just at a typical employment claim or an employment litigation, the costs today are significantly more than they were 5 years ago, let alone 10 years ago. But Ted, I see no efficiencies when it comes to leveraging technology to help them take all of the learnings from the past and ultimately cut down on the number of hours spent on delivering those services to me, not only today, but in the future. So part of my speculation is that a lot of investment among the law firms internally are driving opportunities for them to be self-sufficient internally, but it's not necessarily being reflected in the service offerings to the clients.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think there has been I didn't invent this term, but I use it a lot, innovation theater as well in the law firm world, where, they'll stand up a chief innovation officer and then not either give them sufficient resources or sufficiently empower them to make change across the law firm. Um, I guess how to phrase this the best way. Law firm culture is unique, and innovation is not deeply embedded in law firm culture today. Again, I'm using broad brushstrokes. There are exceptions to this, and I think firms are making really good strides down this path now because we're kind of being forced to. But historically, it's not been an innovative industry. Law firms have been laggards with technology adoption. That's well documented. They've had limited investment in technology infrastructure. They're just now moving to the cloud, and we're in 2025. That's really a 2-3 year phenomenon. I've worked with 110 AM law firms over my 17 years. That's when I stopped counting. The number's higher. So I've had a really good cross-sectional view of what law firms do internally, and they move slow. They play it safe. And that's kind of like being a lawyer, right? I mean, you're risk averse, you're cautious, you're comfortable with the status quo, you're not comfortable with ambiguity. So I don't know how much, of that dynamic do you think is also playing into this?
Well, but I think there's a balance. because to use an analogy of two sides of the coin, I think corporate law departments have been in the same mode as well to a certain extent, Ted. I mean, historically, when I look back over my 30 plus year career in house, we've always looked to our external law firm partners to help drive best in class services from a legal perspective and use that as a barometer gauge against the services that we're delivering in house. We're also looking to them for new ways of thinking with regard to how we might go about mitigating risk or identifying risk, et cetera. But when it comes to investing in new technologies, and we as the buyer of services have been so reliant on the seller of services to help guide us that in many regards we're finding ourselves in a position of saying, if we're not going to get that guidance with regard to use of technology, we've got to take the bull by the horns ourselves, and we got to find a way to not only address multiple levels of service offerings, whether it is commodity work or what have you, to help us better manage the monies for which we have inherent responsibility for from the organization. It's not easy to sit before a head of finance or a CFO and say, hey, look, my budget's going to increase just with regard to outside counsel by 10 or 12 or 15 or 20%, merely because the hourly billing rate is increasing that much. More and more CFOs and CEOs are finding themselves getting more and more immersed into the buy-sell equation with regard to legal services. They're putting pressure on general's counsel and heads of legal operations to involve procurement in the negotiation position with regard to law firms, all because you can't continue to sustain an ever increasing legal budget, whether it's fixed cost with your in-house team or variable cost with your external team, without having some way of reevaluating the buy-sell relationship, how services are rendered, how they're bought and paid for, and operating under the pressure of we've got to do things more efficiently and ultimately more cheaper.
Interesting. Yeah. So I don't have a good cross-sectional view on the inside side of the house. I spent 10 years at Bank of America and engaged with our legal team on a number of occasions. And my observation was they were pretty underfunded. From a technology standpoint, it was toothpicks and bubble gum. So I filed a couple of patents for some technology solutions that we built in the anti-money laundering group, which was a big area of focus in the late 2000s. And it was like SharePoint, SharePoint lists and info path forms and like workflows that these lawyers and the legal ops teams like cobbled together. There were no industry solutions. They didn't even have their own document management system. Are the legal departments properly funded? Do they have what they need from a capital perspective to do what they need to do?
That's a pretty broad question. If I just look, for example, at the United States, I'd say it's a mixed bag. I mean, I've had the opportunity to chat with some heads of legal of some of the largest companies in the world that say they feel very adequately funded and they've got the financial resources to make the investments that they'd like to make. Nobody has a blank check, and we surely don't here either. But those law departments that have been very, very fiscally prudent in managing the money that we have, that they are extended to each year, they work very, very collaboratively with their finance teams, as do we, to make sure that not only do we appreciate just having the dollar to resolve our claims, to make investments, but the more and more we engage with them and we think like the business, we talk like the business, we understand and appreciate how much revenue has to get generated just for us to have the money we need to operate, the more and more attuned you are with how the CFO thinks, the CEO thinks, et cetera. And it puts you in a position of having, well, I'll call it financial credibility. So for us, because of how disciplined we have been in managing our financial resources, we've been extended the opportunity to make some pretty significant investments in technology that are actually paying dividends and showing a very, very positive ROI. It's not easy to get there, but establishing, at least either early in the career of a GC or a head of legal operations, on aligning with the business to make sure that they appreciate that you're running your function like a business. It makes it all the much more less challenging to get the money you need to make the investments that are necessary.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you talked a minute ago about potentially the legal departments are sometimes holding back law firms. I mean, in my experience with cloud specifically, law firms that had a heavy focus on regulated industries, particularly financial services, cloud adoption became a real challenge. And these are companies who were already themselves in the cloud, but having OCGs holding their clients back from going there, which, didn't make sense to me, because if I'm a law firm client, who do I want securing my data? The law firm's IT department or Microsoft, for around a mail server, for example. So it never made sense to me. It sounds like a lot of that friction has been removed. Is that accurate
And I
in
think it
terms?
continues to, yes, I think it's accurate. And I think it continues to get removed. The more and more uh, traditionally conservative lawyers, and that's how we're trained, right? To be very, very risk adverse, understand and appreciate, particularly the security issues associated with the cloud, the more comfortable that you get. And there's always a balance, because you can scare the heck out of anybody with regard to putting data in the cloud and the theory and everything else. And then there's a balance of, okay, what's the practicality? And that's what we, as at least those in the legal department that are going to guide our business to make informed, sustainable decisions, are charged with the responsibility for doing. And that's part of the balance, Ted.
Makes sense. So the last time you and I spoke, you had talked about, like, sometimes, again, the resistance can come from either side of the table, but law firms being resistant to new technologies. And I think you had an M&A deal where AI was rejected, and I think you ended up shopping and maybe finding an alternative provider. Do you remember that
Yeah,
discussion?
a little bit of a different twist to that, and that is, how can we think way outside the box with regard to something involving an M&A deal? And there's multiple phases or stages in an M&A deal, one of which is due diligence. And historically, for gosh, longer than I've been a lawyer, either in-house counsel or outside counsel, physically a number of people would get access to that data room, and they would review the documents, prepare a summary that would be reviewed by a partner. It'd be culminated in some kind of due diligence book and shared with the client or the decision makers. But there are technologies that will automate every element of that process. And we're actually using some of that now in an acquisition that we are undertaking. And the results of that, when you compare what the law firm is doing and when you compare what the AI driven tool is doing, is remarkable, because the integrity of the data is showing that there's really no deficiency with regard to that integrity. So I see massive opportunities just with regard to document review, whether it's an M&A setting, whether it's a finance setting, et cetera, to really drive significant savings when it comes to doing things such as due diligence in a transaction.
Interesting.
And we have had some resistance. I've had some firms that have openly said, "Boy, this is a hyper competitive position for us to offer," realizing that significant amounts of fees will no longer be billed by them to conduct the due diligence. But you embrace it, and as one of the partners at a regional law firm told me about a month ago, he said, "I do this on one deal, you'll probably give me the next one, and maybe even the next one, because ultimately I'm going to save you money in the long run." And I've had at least one law firm said, "No, that's just not part of the way that we think. We want to do it, the way that we have traditionally done it." And that's
Wow.
fine if that model works for them. But for me, when I look at the cost of due diligence and the opportunity to take out quite a bit of external costs, it's something I'm surely going to pursue.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like anti-competitive position to take if you're a law firm and you have a client asking for these capabilities. You're either so busy with incoming work that you could take it or leave it, or you're out of tune with where the market is heading. I can't imagine telling my customers, "Hey, yeah, I know you want that, but we're just not going to do it."
Yeah.
It wouldn't
Well,
work for me.
yeah, it didn't work for us either. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Wow. Well, what about the last time we spoke? You mentioned labor and employment. We have several L&E firms as clients here at InfoDash. One of them is a long-term client, done a lot of press with us, so I can talk about them a little bit. Um, Ogletree Deacons. I have seen their L&E business balloon, and their KM and their data analytics team. They have invested so much in. It's grown. So when the current CKIO took over, they were in. It was right after COVID, 2020. Within 5 years, they've tripled the size of that team, and a big chunk of that headcount is focused on data and analytics, and they're doing some really neat stuff over there. Um, I know other firms are doing the same thing. I see the investment, but like from a and the reason I brought that up is you mentioned the cost of a labor and employment matter, and the fact that you didn't feel like you were getting insights into past cases, and all the sorts of stuff that I see other firms really getting sophisticated in how they're bringing to bear some of this information. But how important, how far do you dig in when you're evaluating your panel firms on, hey, what's your data analytics team look like? How big is it today? How much investment are you putting there? How big a factor is that when you're deciding where to send work to?
It's becoming an increasingly important factor. Every every lawyer among our panel firms with whom we interact, they're all good lawyers. And whether or not I've got 21 firms on a panel or 30 firms, let alone 300 firms, Ted, no matter what firm I use, I'm going to get good legal representation for the issue at hand. So from a competitive environment, for those members of the law or those law firms that are listening, when it comes to delivery of legal services in just a traditional way, you've got to find a way to set yourself out from your competition because the underlying service offering is generally the same. The law is the law. Yeah, people will interpret it differently, but not so radically differently. And when I look at, for example, what we do on a day-to-day basis, which is probably no different than a lot of corporate law departments. And even though we are a large department, whether you're a department of one or a department of thousands, you're going to have employment claims. And they're going to either be involving the EEOC or maybe a local state level authority. But every one of those claims, especially from the EEOC, is based on a consistent set of laws. Now, the facts are different, the allegations are different, right? But there's common threads. And for years, we have had external counsel represent us on a number of those claims. And a claim would get opened and it would get closed, and a new one opened and a new one closed. But it was about 10 years ago where I started asking my internal team, what's the common thread through all of these matters? Now, there wasn't technology to do anything other than put everything on a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet, and say, here's what we're saying with regard to the consistency. But we realized at the time, okay, we now have visibility into what the common denominator is. Where do we need to go train people in our organization to help mitigate these risks? And we went about doing that. But Ted, it led to a decision about 2.5 years ago where now we've got all of this data with, for example, employment claims. And we said, is there technology available to us that will help us completely streamline this process? Do we really need an in-house or an external attorney writing that first responsive brief to the agency? So we went about partnering with our IT department. We leveraged Gen AI and we developed a tool that in many regards will fully automate this process, pulling together the responsive information, that we need from the HR system about the employee that has filed the claim to drafting the first responsive pleading without any human being getting involved. Now, we're still going through the development stage, but this is going to be a breakthrough for us because it's going to save a significant amount of money in internal and external costs. And when we get this right, and we said this is live, we'll never just let it go unfettered like that racehorse I talked about. There will always be somebody to manage this. But the more corporate law departments that begin to think this way, the more and more the savings are going to only continue to generate. And it's all going to be driven by the effective use, number one, of data, because without the data, Ted, you can't do anything. Don't even waste your time with regard to a shiny AI or tech tool. You got to have the data organized and structured. And once you do, you can overlay any type of technology to really help you make much better decisions.
Yeah, it's interesting to see, how sophisticated the clients are getting as well. I see it on the law firm side, but hearing stories like this is really interesting. Well, that brings us to another topic, which is the impact of Gen AI and the law firm world, and what they can expect and how they change their business practices. Because it's not going to be long when clients like you invest and start handling matters in-house rather than sending those to outside counsel. That's going to have a top line impact on these businesses. And the hourly billing model we've been talking about the death of it for at least 15 years. It just doesn't seem to want to die. And when I look at like the percentage of AFAs versus hourly, it's still overwhelmingly hourly. And I think we're going to start to see a shift in that. But from a client's perspective, how would you like to see your law firm partners structuring their pricing in a way that works for everybody? What I think I'm hearing from you is taking what it would cost hourly and then just automating it on the back end and charging you the same thing. That's not what you're looking for. You're looking for something different. How would you like your law firm partners to be thinking about their pricing strategy?
Well, one, when it comes to the relationship I have with my law firms, I want to pay a fair price for the work delivered. And I do think that when we look at the progressive increases of just the traditional billing rate over the course of the past 10 years, and we fast forward that just to 2030, the average, the data shows that the average hourly rate of a partner in a law firm of any size is going to be $984 an hour. That's huge. I think no matter where you get, okay, I've got 1,000 hours involved in something before you know you got $1 million spend, which is of course egregious. But what I'm looking for from my law firms is really two things. Work into your billing model the value opportunity proposition, but also work in the risk balance. What are you willing to put at risk with me when you're billing? It's easy just to say, look, I put in 400 hours times the hourly rate, here it is. But we all know that whether you're in-house or whether you're external, there's always inefficiencies built into that equation. But I really would like to see the law firms come back to me and say, look, we have evaluated, and I'm going to give a hypothetical, all of the litigation that we've handled for you over the course of the past 5 years. And let's assume it's employment related. And here are the common denominators. The average cost of the first responsive pleading is X, of the summary judgment is X, of the interrogatories it's X, et cetera, et cetera. And here is our path forward with regard to how we're going to bring the total cost of that down. Now, for example, we have well over 100 employment claims at any one time. And you can take any responsive pleading, and Ted, you can recycle those from cut and paste from one into another. I don't want to pay for it time after time after time. Again, I do think there's a lot of billing like that from various law firms where you do pay from $1, hour one with regard to the billing. But I would like to see at least verification from the law firms how they really are driving efficiencies with regard to their billing. If at the end of the day they say, look, it's 100 hours times our $600 hourly rate, And here's how we got to that. Here's the value we delivered. Here's how we're leveraging the opportunities to bring costs down. That's great. Just give me visibility to it. But without that visibility, I'm operating under the assumption that there's not any incentive that you have to drive those efficiencies, except for me saying, look, Ted, you got to change, because if you don't, I got to go somewhere else, which is tough to do
Yeah,
with a law firm.
it is. Those are strong relationships, and your law firm
Mm-hmm.
partners really get to understand your business and your people, and your risk profiles. So yeah, you invest in your law firm partners. So I'm sure changing is not the top of your priority list.
And
What about?
part of that balance, excuse me if I may, part of that balance, we in-house cannot exist. We simply cannot exist without our external law firms, and they can't exist without us. And we know that there's this tension with regard to the delivery of services, this tension with regard to we want to see things done more efficiently. The balance, and whoever figures out this proposition as to how to achieve the law firm's objectives of still being paid a fair price for the work that they are delivering, while still creating the perception and the reality in the minds of their clients that they are really delivering value and that there is a justification for what is being billed, that's a massive recipe for sustainable success.
Yeah, from my perspective, so we are a intranet and extranet platform for large law firms, and as part of our extranet offering that is client facing, which is new, we've built dozens of bespoke solutions, but we just released our product maybe 6 weeks ago, and we're seeing our strategy is a little different. So rather than the incumbent in that space is HiQ, it's on an island. It's very ring fence. It's hard to get data in there to share with clients. Our solution we deploy in the client's environment, so they have the opportunity to share anything internally. Right? We have integrations so they could share analytics around matter profile. They can share past invoices. They could share legal spend by practice area, by timekeeper, all this sorts. I don't see a huge appetite for that, and I'm wondering, from a client's perspective, how important is it to have visibility into you know metrics and data that maybe are on the law firm side. I know you guys have built systems to create visibility on your side, but how important is it for you to have those data points from inside the law firm?
It's secondary for me. What I really want to see is a reflection in my bills of the law firm's investment in technology that is driving efficiencies for me. Now, that's selfish because I'm only one of many, many clients. But if you're doing it for me, you're doing it for others. And the more and more you as a law firm can show how that investment that you're making with those 2,000 or 3,000 different percentage increases that you were quoting a little bit earlier are really turning into efficiencies for the clients, oh, the better off that you're going to be. Because right now, I think there's a resistance to share that insight. And my advice to any law firm listening is open the kimono, show us what it is, because the more that you share with us, the deeper the trust, the more the engagement, and the much more opportunity to be open, particularly when it comes to discussion with regard to fees.
Interesting. Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. Um, okay, one topic that I'm really curious to get a buyer of legal services perspective on is the rise of alternative business structures. Now we have two states, Arizona and Utah, and we have KPMG, who was just licensed to practice law in Arizona. And from my perspective, it seems like the big law world should be more concerned that they are. And I think there's a little bit of complacency because the big four have tried multiple times. And when you look at the Legal Services Act over in the UK, it really hasn't done much, right? Things haven't really changed dramatically as a result of that. However, I think this time is different because the means of legal production now are changing very rapidly. And when I look at okay, who's best positioned to capitalize on this transformation, I see the resources of the big four. KPMG is the smallest, the 40 billion in revenue. They're 275,000 employees. Innovation is deeply ingrained in their culture. They have a incredible advisory practice with all sorts of Gen AI experts and Lean Six Sigma black belts. And I look at all those resources, and then I look at law firms and the resources that they have at their disposal. They've got, and KPMG has 4,000 lawyers. If you were to spin that out into a law firm, they'd be AmLaw 15 at least,
Right.
maybe AmLaw 10.
Right.
So, they've got tremendous resources. As a buyer, how do you think about this movement, and how willing would you be to explore options like, I don't know what their KPMG law or whatever in Arizona? How willing would you be to testing these new offerings?
Very open, very, very open. Not because I'm overly progressive, because it's a different model. It's it's opening up a whole new avenue of competition for the traditional law firms. I think that it is only a matter of time before more and more states drop the barriers with regard to mandatory lawyer ownership of law firms. There are still trillions of dollars on the sidelines with PE firms waiting to invest. And who would have thought that 20 years ago, when the whole idea of litigation funding would now be, at least in one regard, a $48 billion opportunity for one company participating in that space? There's money out there, and there is money to invest in this space. And there are organizations that are having these discussions right now about alternative ways of setting up law firms that are not owned by lawyers. So, if there's any regret I have, is that I'm probably in the closing stages of my career, because if I was early on, I think I'd be still very, very young, early on in my career, I'd be closing my career with a lot more states being open to this. But I do think it's going to be very, very good for the industry as a whole. There's so much work that what comes out of a law department, Ted, is commodity work. Drafting an NDA, drafting a contract, a real estate lease, a procurement vendor. There's a way to systematize that through processes, leveraging technology to help you do that. And I would predict that well over 50% of what comes out of my department is commodity type work. So it gives us an opportunity to find a way to streamline that, whether it is with corporate owned providers of legal services, such as we will see in Arizona for a time. But I would be very, very open to it as long as they've got the infrastructure to support our needs.
Yeah. I posted an article today on LinkedIn. I called it Big Law 2.0, a radical blueprint. And it's a model where the partnership model in law firms really holds them back from innovation in so many ways. The partnership model is anti-innovative just by its very nature. It prioritizes short-term profits over long-term investment. There's lateral mobility where lawyers can take their book of business elsewhere that also impairs capital investment, cash basis accounting, business professionals that aren't sufficiently empowered, the inability to create equity incentives for top talent, almost zero R&D investment. So yeah, I posted something on LinkedIn today about an idea where law firms could transition to, and to your point in terms of investment in PE money. PE money brings more than just money. It brings operational discipline, right?
Right.
And a corporate structure that's actually not dysfunctional, where you don't have consensus-driven decision-making. A board puts management in place and lets management do their job and holds them accountable.
Mm-hmm.
Not everything's a vote. People are empowered to make decisions. Right. So, but man, it feels like an uphill battle, this ABS movement, starting slow. I don't know. Do you think it's viable for this to catch traction and move quickly, at least fast enough in time for law firms to potentially make a transition? Or do you think this is going to be a slow process?
Sometimes you've got to go slow to go fast. I think it will be slow for a bit. And there will be multiple parallel paths. This will be one where people will be keenly watching what other states may be doing to emulate what is going on in Arizona. But at the same time, the buyers of legal services are going to be much more forceful when it comes to partnering with their law firms to help drive down the total cost of legal and to do things much more efficiently. And that's where data and technology are going to come into play. The other is there's going to be an introspective look from law firms, particularly as the folks my age peel off and are retired, that are replaced by people who have grown up with technology, where there's going to be some just natural change that will come about because of an affinity. Part of the challenge is the infrastructure with which the traditional law firms are structured, from the partner, the associate, the senior associate, and the compensation structures as well. That's not easy to change. It's no different than any business. It's not easy to change how you not only receive revenue, but how revenue is ultimately used to fund your organization. So I've used the word balance a number of times, but if there's anything that I would really love to see, and it's one that I have been actively thinking about seeking to champion, it's bringing together a group of CLOs and managing partners from law firms just to get in the same ballroom somewhere and say, look, this is where we're at with regard to the industry. This is what the sellers are seeking and to do, and this is what the buyers want. And how do we come together in an environment where there's no discussion with regard to pricing or all the appropriate antitrust and competition boxes are checked, but just have that open dialogue. How are we going to do things better, faster, cheaper so that we have a much more sustainable solution going forward? Can you imagine if you and I had this conversation 30 years from now and I took that $984 rate and it now becomes $3,000 or $4,000, if not $5,000 an hour? It's incomprehensible, at least to me right now.
Yeah, it doesn't seem sustainable. Well, I know we're running out of time. I just wanted to ask you one last question to wrap up here, because I thought the last time that we spoke, I thought you had an interesting vision. Like, how do you see legal departments and law firms and their operating models evolving in the next few years? Let's say 5 years, like 2030, right? I know a lot is unpredictable with respect to technology and how that's going to evolve, but we kind of are seeing a trajectory of which way it's going. But I don't know. What is your vision for what that world looks like in the next few years?
It'll be forced change. 20 minutes ago, I was talking about, as the buyer, we relied on the seller of the services for a lot of insight and a lot of creative ways of thinking. We're getting uncompromising quality service. So thank you to every law firm out there, especially those that service DHL. But you have to understand that as a CLO, GC, head of legal operations, we're not making decisions on our own. We're being held accountable by people to whom we report, the CFO and or the CEO or the board. And they are putting us under more and more scrutiny with regard to what we're doing to rein in the costs of legal. And we can only do so much internally. I mean, when I look at my internal fixed costs, 90+% are my people, and I'm going to continue to invest in them. So yeah, I can cut out a couple pencils and paper clips and paper, but I'm not going to save any significant amounts of money. So the pressure really becomes, if I can't really drive significant savings internally, the only other place to go is externally. And those are forces that I can't control because of the pressures put on me. So I really want to work proactively with our law firms, and I'd like to see every corporate law department do the same, to really have a tough, sit-down, open discussion about the mutual needs of both and how we are going to find a way to really leverage the tools that are available to us and the resources to bring a better balance to the buy-sell relationship. Historically, Ted, the seller has dictated the terms of sale and still do. But the buyers are now getting more and more leery of that. And now they're pushing back. And I think that's only going to continue and sure will over the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Mark, this has been a fantastic conversation. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking a few minutes. And you're our first Inside Counsel guest on the show. We're 70 episodes in at this point, and I know that our audience is just going to love hearing your perspective on all of this. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate it. It'll only get better from here because the first one, it's kind of a trial and error, but I'm sure everybody else after me will do much, much better. But everything that we've talked about And what I've been able to do, at least here at DHL, is because I'm surrounded by an incredible team. And I'm sure that's true of a lot of your guests from the law firms and those that you will have as well from the corporate side. But again, thank you for the opportunity to share some insight. I really appreciate it. And I'm a huge fan of what you're seeking to do. So thanks.
Awesome. All right. Have a good one, Mark. I appreciate it.
Thank
hope
you.
Hope to
Take
see you
care,
soon.
Ted.
Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content.